Welcome to the last module of this MOOC, Implementation Arrangements, Monitoring, and Evaluation for Pre-Primary. We will now cover some of the last steps in the plan preparation process. By the end of this module, you should be able to explain the concepts and arrangements relating to effective plan implementation for the pre-primary subsector, explain the concepts and purpose of the monitoring and evaluation cycle, and define the major considerations to be taken into account for the choice of key ECE indicators. We are now at the stage where the priority programs and the cost and financing framework have been drafted. In this module, we will look at the final 3 phases in the preparation of the ESP. Development of a well-informed multi-year action plan, defining clear governance structures that enable implementation of the plan, and monitoring the progress in achieving key pre-primary plan milestones. Please note that we are showing these phases in this order for the sake of this presentation, but in practice, there is no predefined order of these particular 3 phases. Each ESP may tackle these in different sequences. Implementation of ESP pre-primary programs and activities will occur at many levels, spanning, for example, from pre-primary teachers who carry out tasks such as implementing the curriculum and collecting data on children's learning progress, to their immediate supervisors, who, for example, provide on-site coaching and classroom observations, to local government, who is responsible for overall monitoring and oversight at the local level and data gathering, as well as central government departments involved in overall monitoring at the central level, developing and reviewing curricula, and systematizing data. Considering the wide range of actors involved in ESP implementation, and for the pre-primary subsector in particular, it will be important for the plan to clearly delineate the roles and responsibilities of all involved institutions and individuals across the subsector. This is particularly relevant in countries with significant government decentralization. One way to operationalize the plan is translating the ESP into a multi-year action plan, also referred to as implementation or operational plan. Multi-year action plans outline the detailed activities for a specific period of the ESP, generally covering 2 to 3 years, specifying who is responsible for the implementation of each activity, as well as the related outputs and outcomes, timing, costs, and sources of financing. It was quite common for multi-year action plans to be supplemented by annual action plans. However, we are seeing that in countries where there are effective annual operational plans, there is a tendency not to develop multi-year action plans to avoid overburdening the overall planning process. A separate pre-primary subsector action plan can be developed during or following the ESP preparation process, but it must be linked to the overall multi-year action plan. It is particularly useful to have a specific pre-primary subsector action plan if the ESP is organized by thematics with ECE dispersed throughout, as a subsector action plan will make it easier to monitor pre-primary implementation. In addition to the implementation responsibilities detailed in the multi-year action plan, structures to oversee and advise on implementation are generally needed and described in the ESP. This is often very similar to the 3-tiered participatory structure developed for ESP preparation. Please do remember that, to the extent possible, this structure should be based on existing structures. At the lowest level are all of the departments in charge of overseeing specific pre-primary programs. They will be responsible for preparing annual operational plans and day-to-day monitoring and program implementation. At the next level is the Strategic Monitoring Committee, which will oversee plan implementation in a more comprehensive way, ensuring coordination between the different departments and deliberating about higher-level decisions to keep plan implementation on track. This committee is generally composed of department directors and chaired by a high-ranking officer. There should also be consideration for adding members from other ministries that play a role in pre-primary education. Moving from these technical levels to the policy level, the Joint Steering Committee, created during plan preparation, can be maintained. This committee will continue to be the linking mechanism between the ministry and the major development partners, and will advise the minister on major policy decisions at different moments in the plan's implementation, especially at annual, midterm, and final reviews, which we will cover in the next section. Implementation structures will of course vary by country, depending on specific needs and the structures already in place. Depending on the context, it might also be useful to have a specific pre-primary education subsector working group in the structure for implementation arrangements. It is also crucial to ensure that there is sufficient capacity within the education sector and the pre-primary subsector specifically to carry out plan implementation. The ability of the ministry to its plan and programs will depend on many factors, not all of which are under the control of the ministry. An overall analysis of capacity for plan implementation must examine the following: public sector management in institutions, the effectiveness of educational administration, the profiles and competencies of officers, and the analysis of aid effectiveness principles. Let's first look at the public sector management in institutions. This includes the quality of public administration and civil service management, quality of budgetary and financial management, efficiency of resource mobilization, including for subsector priorities, and transparency and accountability. For pre-primary, this also includes considering the capacity of other state and non-state providers of pre-primary education and how it will affect planned ESP priorities. Effectiveness of educational administration includes the clarity of roles and responsibilities within the administration, the link between roles and structures, communication and coordination, preparedness for crisis and disaster situations, and monitoring and evaluation. For pre-primary, a particular concern may be the institutional capacity of administrative and financial management and linkages between local, regional, and central levels, especially in decentralized systems. In some cases, it might be helpful to conduct an institutional analysis for the pre-primary subsector to highlight problem areas and help ministries overcome capacity constraints. The profiles and competencies of officers includes their qualifications, skills, training, incentives, and gender. A key consideration for pre-primary is the recruitment and training of the individuals within pre-primary support systems, such as management staff responsible for planning, regulation, training, and monitoring, as well as the staff in other supportive units, such as training and curriculum, quality assurance, and pedagogical advisors. While many of these structures are already in place, they may lack the necessary competencies specific for pre-primary education. Analysis of aid effectiveness principles is looking at to what extent external resources support the development of national systems and capacity. For example, international financing for the pre-primary subsector that is channeled through various donor projects can result in fragmented implementation and related challenges associated with implementation and reporting of results. Looking at those aspects would then be critical. The draft plan should be reviewed against each of these capacity factors. Depending on the overall analysis of the capacity to implement the ESP and the pre-primary components, some objectives and ambitions may have to be revised. A capacity development chapter can also be included within the plan or a capacity development priority program within a subsector to address identified core capacity constraints.